Liz and I are really here. So I'm Emily Mulford from EarthSoft. I'm the Director of Training and Marketing Communications. Liz is one of our trainers and corporate programs specialists, and also one of our DQM subject matter experts here at EarthSoft. And so with that being said, Polly, did you want to say a couple words and just introduce you and Dee maybe really quick?
I will, thank you. So first I want to thank EarthSoft for this opportunity to partner with them on this webinar series and to share details on how we, and by that I mean DDMS's environmental chemistry team, is using the EarthSoft DQM product to assist us with our data review and validation project. And it's been fun for Dee and me to work with Liz and Emily and Ruth preparing for each of these sessions. I also want to thank our attendees, those for whom this is their first session with us, as well as those who are participated in our earlier sessions. As I mentioned, Dee and I are part of the Environmental Chemistry Services, or our shorthand for that is ECS group. And we have each been in this industry as chemists for a really long time. Our team has a vast amount of experience in all arenas of the environmental industry, from the field to the lab, QA, QC, regulatory, forensics, litigation, remediation, and chemistry support for all sorts of projects. These projects range from small wastewater operations to large multiple PRP remediation and monitoring sites, and from one and done investigations to legacy monitoring of sites that go on for decades. Because we perform data review and validation for a variety of clients and projects, we were looking for some way to take some of the grunt work of the routine review off our shoulder so we can concentrate on the parts of the process that really need the attention of a chemist validator. And we decided that EarthSoft DQM would fill that role for us. As mentioned, this is the third of a three-part series. The first session was an overview of how DQM fits into the validation framework. We started with an intro to data validation and to automated data review using DQM. We discussed what data review and validation are, what DQM is and does, and how DQM is being used by DDMS's ECS team to aid in review and validation of the lab data. In session 2, we covered DDMS's ECS team's use of DQM to perform a 2A review. And because we review, and as I mentioned earlier, we review data for a variety of clients, those who use EQuIS as well as those who do not use EQuIS. And that sometimes limits our ability to make use of some of the benefits of other EQuIS modules. In today's session, we'll discuss the use of DQM as part of the process for more advanced review and validation. If you have questions about other EQuIS modules, please feel free to contact DDMS's EDM group for more context, and they'll talk through with you how these modules can be used for other end-to-end workflows. And before I turn this over to Dee, I want to give a shout out to all of the DDMS colleagues and all of the EarthSoft people who helped us with DQM and helped in preparing what you are about to see today. So Dee, without further words, I'm turning it over to you.
And Dee, right, did we want to start with the first poll question before we get carried away?
Let's throw out the first poll question.
All right, let me launch this sucker. So get your mice ready here so you can vote on this quick poll. So the question is, have you ever started a project that didn't require data review but ended up needing it anyway? Most people are saying yes. A few people are saying not yet. I love that those are 2 choices, by the way.
That's like this, because it happens too often. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. All right, so let me close this and I'll actually just share the results really fast here. So you guys can get an idea there. So 88% said yes, 13% said not yet. Perfect. All right, Dee, let's do it.
This one is going to go into the more in-depth review, like a 2B, or all the way to a full validation. And those are the two ways that we are currently using and working towards using DQM for our needs. And I have a couple of caveats or disclaimers because I want to make sure that everybody understands that I'm speaking from ECS's perspective. We have people at DDMS that use DQM for particular projects where they are able to use a lot more of the functionality than maybe we can. We also have a lot of the other ERSOF products that are being used. So I am not an expert. I'm a complete novice here. I've been working on this for about a year. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact folks in DDMS at EDM or ask questions of the ERSOF folks. And, you know, I'm happy to funnel the questions to the people that know, but I won't be able to answer a lot of that stuff. So they'll keep you posted on those. So please feel free to ask whatever questions you have. All right. I did have a question the other day about what possible things might be requiring qualification of data that would not be included in DQM. And I want everybody to keep in mind that what you get electronically is not the whole world of data that ends up possibly being needed, especially if you're going into a validation or a litigation situation. And I just want you all to keep that in mind. There's a lot of other stuff that some of it may be electronic, some of it isn't, because ECS gets things from labs that are still using paper notebooks. Keep in mind that there's a lot of that stuff that ends up having to be done manually. So that's what we're going to talk about, what things DQM can do for us and what things we have to do manually and how we can mesh those two together. So that's a picture of Sean the sheep. No particular reason. We all like Sean the sheep. So there he is. We had Emily Latella the last time around, so we needed somebody. So I'm going to hand this over to Liz now, and she's going to talk about a couple of the questions that were left from last session that were about functionality. So I will hit some slides. Let me know when you want the next one.
All right. Good deal. Thank you. So one of the questions that remained from last session said, did I hear you say that DQM can be used on an entire batch of data in the database, like by date range or something like that? And that's a great question. Yes, it sort of depends on how your data has been reported and what fields have been completed within EQuIS in order to, choose a particular data set. But when you're starting the event in DQM, you can select data by chain of custody, either field or lab SDG, by your test batch ID or task code. And then there's the sneaky other piece, which is by sample codes. And that actually will allow you to bundle in additional samples, perhaps like an equipment blank or something like that, that might have been not included in that particular target data set, but would still have implications and qualifications that would need to be applied if there are issues with that particular sample, so that you can sort of, issue or usher that guy right in there as well when you're building those data sets. So if you have the information necessary populated in those particular fields, then you can select multiple choices within those various selection types. It's kind of like, think about it as your shopping cart. You're putting everything in that you need to make the recipe. And so if you don't need cilantro, leave it out. So yeah, go ahead on the next one, Dee. All right, cool. The next question is, how does DQM handle lab QC that came in from a different SDG? So this is a great question, and it sort of depends on the particular check and what the logic for that check is. Different checks have different association criteria. So if you're looking at method blank association, it's going to be looking at the batch information, for example. But if we're talking about something like an equipment blank or something like that, as I mentioned before, you can pick a particular sample to be included with the rest of that data. And not available yet, but coming very soon, we will have the ability for you to actually group different sets of field QC samples and relate them to the particular associated samples within DQM. I can tell you more about that when we get to the roadmap piece later on in the session, but there is going to be a greater flexibility in associating additional QC samples to a given data set in the future. Good deal. Okay, next question is, where do you select the best reportable result when there are multiple results? Oh, this is a good one. So there are actually two different checks that exist in DQM. They're both repeated results checks. One will look at repeated results within the same method, analyte matrix combination, and the other, and for a particular sample rather, and the other will actually look outside that particular method. So if you wanted to pick a best result, if you have like high resolution and full scan analysis, or if you have maybe an organic analyte by both semi-volatile and volatile methods or something like that, you can pick your preferred result. Maybe non-detect to the lower detection limit is preferred or something like that. But DQM will actually highlight those instances where those results are repeated more than once, and then you can assign a qualifier that is the do not report or mark as not reportable qualifier, which will allow DQM in the process to basically mark that data as non-reportable. So in selecting the one you don't want, you're of course also highlighting the one that you want to have included in your final reports. And then the last question is, can you export the EDD and then make updates to the validation desired and then re-import? And this was actually a follow-up to a question about whether or not you can roll back data. And so it's not a native process to DQM currently. We have had some interest in that potentially being included in the future, but it's not in our immediate plans. But you can actually use a couple of different EDD formats to accomplish that now. EQEDD is one that a lot of folks are familiar with. It's sort of like our everything can possibly be loaded kind of format. It's a really comprehensive format. There's also the analytical results report, the analytical results format, which will allow you to export data from your analytical results to report. And using that particular format, you can basically load the data back in using those particular tables. So you could basically clear out everything in that EDD except for the required fields, any sort of qualifier requirements, and if you have to adjust any sort of detections or anything like that. And those could then be re-imported into EQuIS. And because you're loading it via an EDD, it will have that eBatch association so that there's a bit of a tracking process that goes along with that as well. So those are the questions. I know I blew through those, but we've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about today. So I'll hand it back to Dee.
Well, I mean, I think I'll touch on at least the choosing the result that you want to report somewhere along the line. So show a slide on that too. All right, so previously we were talking about what it takes to do just a plain old 2A review and the EDD and how DQM processes that. And now we're going to get into the more in-depth review and what's added to each one of these things. It's sort of a progressive process. And the 2B review, for instance, adds in calibration, measurement system criteria, control limits and things like that for the measurement system. And I think we have a good graphic here. This is Ruth's picture. And here she is not here to see it, but we'll make sure she gets to see it. So this just shows you a progressively deeper dive into the data to do these different stages of review and validation. And then, as I say, keep in mind also that if you have any kind of anticipation of litigation, you may even want to go a little further than this. This is the standard stages from the EPA document for Superfund, but these are kind of universally used. And there are other names for the different levels, and it gets a little crazy trying to figure out what one is. I think QSM is using the same thing for DOD, is pretty similar. So keep in mind at the forefront always, you have to remember why it is that we look at the data, which is, predicated by why we're actually going out and collecting samples and sending them to the lab and having them analyzed. There's two really big questions that we want to answer. And then what we do with that information may vary, but that's where those are the biggies. And keep in mind also, remember this picture from previous sessions, that I always call the whole structure that supports the analytical result the pyramid, because if you think about the single analytical result as the very tip of that pyramid, all of that stuff that supports it is underneath there, and it gets pretty big. Normally in data validation, review, you're just looking at summary forms and things like that. Then as you get into the more in-depth review, you're looking at the calibrations and more in-depth portions of the measurement system and the quality system underneath it. But there's a whole lot of stuff that we assume that the laboratory is going to be able to provide if you need it, because every piece of equipment, every bit of consumables, every reagent, every standard, everything, it has to be traceable. And if you've worked with laboratories with accreditation and things like that, then you understand how that process works and what they're required to do. But it's really good to make sure, you know, that you can get those things if you need them before you get started. And a lot of that stuff isn't something that you're going to get electronically. You're going to have to, you know, delve into that by hand. But just make sure you know that it exists. And like I say, we assume that it's going to be there if you need it. So in order to do a bit more in-depth review, the stage 2B, you need the sample documentation. You need the summaries. Those are the Form 1s for all of the samples, for any of the field QC, and for any of the laboratory QC. You may also want instrument performance verifications, and that can be the continuing calibrations, the checks to make sure that the instrument's still functioning correctly, or the measurement system, whatever you're using, whatever the parameters are. And then you also need to know what rules you're following. People use, you know, national functional guidelines a lot. It's not always applicable to what you're doing. Usually not. There's not that much that's COP, but you need to know if there's a project QAP, if you've already determined what's going to be the necessary limits to meet the DQOs for a particular project, you need to know what those things are. And if you're going to use DQM, you're going to need the electronic deliverables that you can run through to perform the checks. And you have to build, in order to be able to use DQM, you'll have to have converted the QAP information into an electronic version that you can then use. Those are your set of rules electronically that you can run these checks with. All right, so if you want to go into a full bell, go ahead.
Oh, Dee, I was going to say, do we want to launch another poll question really quick?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, did I blow right by one? I did.
Let's do it.
Good catch.
No worries. All right. So this one is how you get data delivered, and you can select all that apply. And I think we actually asked this one in a previous session as well, but it's kind of a good one to you know, see what people say. So I'll give you guys.
It'll probably run the gamut too, because
exactly.
Yeah, everybody's doing different things. Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of people are saying EDDs, but a very big percentage is also saying PDF. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. We're almost done, I think. Let me share it. And so here are the results for us. So yeah, most of us are getting EDDs, which is great, but definitely folks are also getting or in addition, one way or the other, getting PDFs or maybe hard copies, or if you want to share other ways you're getting your data delivered in the questions pane, you can certainly do that as well. Perfect.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it, but we do still get stuff that's just on paper, and the particular lab or whoever's doing the work doesn't have the capacity to make an electronic version. So yeah. Keeping in mind that the more that's electronic, the more checks you can do automatically. But yeah, again, if you want to talk to Earthsoft or other DDMS people about, you know, other modules and other things that can make that process a bit more streamlined, feel free. All right, so what do you need to do a full validation? Well, kind of everything, because now we're adding in all the raw data and all the prep information and everything that you need to support the results that you're going to use for your decision-making process. So let me back up just a second. So with this, you're going to be adding in chromatograms, spectra, pattern matching for something like a PCB. You might be adding isotope ratios, everything that can possibly be required here. I think I have a sample out of order. So, or a slide, excuse me. So how do we get started on it? What's the first thing that we do? We're going to kind of follow the process that we would normally use for a validation effort and go through the different quality elements. So the first thing we want to know is the sample integrity. And DQM can do checks, but again, it's only what you get electronically provided to you. People who are making use of electronic COCs and things like that, you can do a lot more. We get a lot of paper. We still get a lot of paper chains of custody. We get a lot of paper receipt forms from the laboratories and things. So there's a good bit of that that still needs to get done manually, but you can check holding times, which is really convenient by using DQM holding times from sample collection to preparation, and then also from prep to analysis. And I believe sample preservation is a thing that is possible if you get that information electronically. And then the traceability of the sample as far as the actual custody chain is pretty much a manual thing, because you've got to make sure that you've got documented signatures of receipt and relinquishment that cover the entire life of the sample, and also storage conditions and things like that that may be really important to the integrity of the sample that's being analyzed. Okay, yeah, that slide got kind of stirred in there, I think, somehow. So this was we want to make sure that you're getting the correct, this is the next step. You want to make sure that you're detecting and measuring the correct analytes. And the way you do that is you make sure that whatever measurement system is being used is going to give you the analytes that you're targeting. So for instance, if your lab reports that it's benzocaine, like in that spectrum, you want to make sure that they really are detecting the correct compound. And so you want to see reference standards that they use to do their calibrations and things, make sure that those are all correct. And any kind of confirmation criteria, whatever that is, it may be a retention time or a retention time on 2 columns, or the right wavelength, whatever the things are that you need to know, you want to make sure that they're doing that correctly. And then the next step, and each one of these things is, potential qualification of data. This one right now, this is not a DQM thing that we can do, the calibration model and all of that, but who knows in the future? I mean, these data are all electronic. Even the spectra are all electronic. The chromatograms, everything can be reduced to an electronic format. So, in the future down the road, perhaps these can all be done automatically too. That'll be exciting. That would be very exciting. All right, then the next thing. So you have a reported result for an analyte, but how do we make sure that it's an actually authentic sample component and not something that was in the sampling environment or in a container or whatever? So as anybody who looks at data knows, there are a myriad of blanks that get run. And for some projects, there are even background samples taken, thinking of things like the background concentrations of metals in soils, things like that are really important to know before you interpret your results as actual components in the sample. DQM can do some of this. There are, you can look at lab blanks and at field blanks. Some of the things that may need intervention are if field blanks are associated with particular sets of samples, you need to make sure that those are done correctly. If they are, a lot of times we get field blanks with very little information, and so we might not know, how the sampling was done so that we can apply those correctly, and that's information we have to go back and find out. A classic example, it seems sort of like a no-brainer, but we had samples in VOAs where we saw a lot of THMs, trihalomethanes. They are byproducts of chlorination for tap water. And we found out that the field crew was using the hydrants on site, and that's where that was coming from. It wasn't. So things like that, you just have to be really cognizant of and pay attention, because sometimes you can attribute something to a sample that it's not really at the site. And stop me for the next poll question, because I can't see my notes now, so they're covered up by the slides.
I will.
All right, then the next piece that we would look at, now we've made sure that we can see the correct analytes. So now we want to know whether we can measure them correctly. And so we're looking at different kinds of, well, we put up benzo K fluoranthane. So things like we want to make sure that we've got the right separation between benzo B and K. We want to make sure TCDD, we can see the different isomers. You want to make sure that your system is operating properly so that you can get good quantitative results for it. If you can't integrate the peak nicely, then it's going to affect the results you got. So your calibration model is really important, as we've already discussed. And these are also, again, things that right now are manual checks, but there could be a time in the future when they will not be, and they can be done automatically. Then we want to look at the variability. And so we have two main sources of variability. First is the laboratory. Anybody who's looked at lots of lab data knows that you can run a sample, 100 times, you're going to get slightly different results over time. If you're doing it right, you should get something that looks kind of like a bell curve. If you've got some kind of a bias in your system, you'll see a skew, but we want to know how wide that spread is. So there are things that the lab does, replicates, duplicates. Some of the methods actually require those things also. And those give you an idea of, if I have a result of 10, could it be 15 or could it be 5 or could it be a whole lot bigger? And then you also have the field variability, and that can be really dependent on your matrices and things. And there's some of that the DQM tests can do. We've got RPDs for lab spikes and lab duplicates, RPDs for field duplicates, if you know what they are beforehand, because a lot of situations we're in, we find out about the field dupes. They went blind to the lab, as they should, and the laboratory analyzed them, but we have to find out from the samplers then, or from the engineering firm or whoever, what those are. And so we'd have to apply that later. We also get into things with ISM and different sampling techniques that are designed to control that variability for the matrix. And so a lot of that at this point is still being done manually too. But again, this is another thing that, can be done electronically if we can get all that data in the right form. So the process at this point would be, we would have run DQM, we would have applied things manually, done whatever we needed to add into the system, and then we would get a report at the end. So I'm going to show you some examples of what we do and what we look at. And again, a lot of this is still work in progress. We're working on it and adding to it all the time. This is the DQM report display that we normally see. So after we covered running the event in the last 2 sessions and talked about all that, and now we're looking at the actual output from a set of data that we've run DQM through. So we're looking at the DQM check of surrogate recovery. That little drop-down box would give you all of the different checks where exceptions were found. And there is also, as you can see on the tabs in the top, there's the event summary that will show you all the checks that were done and what the results are numerically. And then you get this page, you can also look at all the results, and you can review the results each sample. And you also get an error tab that'll show you things like where there are multiple results from different methods and things like that. They'll show up if there's anything that's DQM wants to alert you to, and you can set some of that yourself. So in this page, we're looking at the top section is where the actual exception is, and the lower section is what's associated with that and what would be qualified. And you can see the DQM qualifiers that were applied here are on the samples are a UJ, so it's not detected and it's estimated. Those are the lab applied the lab qualifier U, and then the J was applied because the surrogate recovery was low. So we've got that added in there. Now, in the process of reviewing and or validating the data, we might want to make changes to these because we might have other information or we might have other decisions to make. So we can do this. Everybody, I apologize to all of you that use DQM on a regular basis, or, you know, and ERSOF people that already know all this stuff, but to us, this is, you know, our process. So I might want to change a whole series of results at one time. So I can do that by entering in those edit boxes, and then I can apply that to all the results that I've filtered here in the lower section. I might want to just change one qualifier, which I can do by doing the drop down. This was the one that we're choosing a result where we want to report the other one and we don't want to report this one. So we've added the R. And you need to keep in mind that the R in this case is like the rejected result, the one we don't want to report. It's a little different than what a validation R is to a validator, because in that case, it's because there's such egregious problems with the QA or QC for that sample result that you'd have to reject it. And it's sort of, it was run, but you can't use it. It's just totally unusable. In this case, it's just that's the one that you chose as the less usable result. And I'll show you at the end where you get to make that choice that all of those get changed from reportable yes to reportable no. Did I blow past a poll question yet?
No, but it's about time for one actually, and it's all about qualifiers. So that's good. That's good timing. So let's launch this one. So the question is, do qualifiers make your data bad? And let's see what folks say on this one. About half of us have voted. It's a race between no and it depends on the qualifier. We're almost there, almost done, I think.
It's funny that we're talking about the R qualifier right now, right?
Exactly. Good timing for it. All right, so let me close this poll and I'll just share this really quick. So you can see there it kind of went back and forth a little bit between the no and the depends on the qualifier, but nobody answered yes, which at least yes all the time, which is it's probably a good thing as well. So there you go.
Well, good, because we do hear that a lot, you know, from people who sometimes are hesitant to have data validated. I've heard that as a reason not to, because the validator is going to put all those qualifiers on there, and then, you know, we're not going to have good data anymore. It's going to be bad. But I always say that it's a whole lot better to know how solid your results are before you go and use them somewhere, and especially before you get called on the carpet to defend them, you know, with an agency or in court or wherever. So yeah, it can give some people the impression that they're questionable, but overall, it's just a better idea to know what you've got. All right, so here is one where we could be just changing one qualifier. Here, we were experimenting. You can create your own user codes and you can create your own remarks and have those populate into any export that you do and create a report from that. Because we're going to do the calibrations and all that manually, we have pretty good list of user defined reason codes that we're going to need to be putting in, and we want them to show up in our reports. So we've got to enter all that information and get it into our database. So this is the way we would do that. And in this case, we're applying to a whole series. If you have an exception in your initial calibration, it's going to affect every result that was run off of that calibration. So you might have a pretty good list of things you're going to qualify. So this would be done using your edit boxes up above. That would be the easiest way to do that. If you only have one or two, you might want to do them one at a time. Okay. The next thing would be to remove something where you don't think it should have been qualified. And this is, again, a one at a time thing. And of course, you can't have a null field there. So you have to put in the NQ for not qualified. So just another, like I say, to us, this is all relatively new. So it's still kind of, this is the part of our process. All right, and this is what I was talking about. Once you've put the R in, and this is what Liz was talking about too, when you decide that you want a particular result and you don't want the other one or ones, and you've entered that R, you get the option here to change the reportable result from yes to no. And then it will also, any other that doesn't have the R in it is going to be considered reportable. So that's where that step happens. This is the completing the event. These are the choices that you get to take. And you can see where you can merge different columns of qualifiers and save those. Again, it's going to depend on what you want to do. You can change detect flags based on the qualifier that's in place. I was thinking that the export and re-import is an important piece of a process too if you're doing a lot of this, because that allows you to change. For instance, if you've got the reporting limit that isn't supported by a calibration, that might be a place where you want to globally for a whole data set, you may want to change that. So it might be easier to do that in that export also. All right, so
Dee, we have one more poll question if you're up for it.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, this is maybe one of my favorites. So let me launch it here. Which data flag freaks you out the most? And
that is obviously
there's some on here that you might feel strongly about other ones that are not on this list, but of the ones that are here, which freaks you out the most?
That may depend on the application too, because
that's true.
Another thing that we hear is if they validate my data, they might raise my reporting limit, and I need it to meet my action limit. So it could depend on what the application is.
Exactly. All right, not everybody's voted yet. I'll give you guys 3 more seconds to cast your vote, and then I'll share the results with folks. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it. So this was, let me share. So most folks said R of the choices that we had. So you can see there folks are, it looks like pretty comfortable with J+, but those R's get people riled up. So
I would think we have seen occasions where the R's end up on a particular analyte that might have been really important for a project. And that's a bad day. And again, that may be, it's one of the things to keep a communication going with your project people so that they know what's happening. Because if a validator starts to see that there are substantial problems with a particular analyte or a particular method or whatever that's going to lead to rejection, it's really good to let somebody know pretty quick. So yeah, just a hint. All right, and so then what about getting this information out into a report? Because we need to be able to produce something as a work product that the client can then use. And if you work in validation or you're familiar with it, you know that there's a lot of different options there, a lot of different requirements. Each client may have something that they'd like particularly that you need to be able to produce for them, or there may be some standard formats that you're following that meet a regional requirement or federal requirement or some specific program. So what EQuIS does have an event report, and I think we have a slide to show. Yeah, here we go. And that can be chosen from the reports selection. And it gives us, this looks kind of familiar because this is a lot like the output, the view screens that we were looking at. And these are the individual checks that were performed, and the exception, well, the ones that had exceptions are all listed on this tab. You can see there's also the summary tab and one with all results. So this can be really useful. For us, it's a really nice way to look at the qualifiers that were applied and the reasons so that somebody can QC the work before it is finalized, so that you can make sure that the validator's decisions were made sense and are defensible, and that the right things were qualified and all that, because we always have to QC a second set of eyes on any kind of output that we're doing before we release those to a client. So this is one option, and you can use that. You can also export the entire DQM product this way And this is really useful also for some of the same reasons. We can take this and then review for ourselves and for another validator who we're QCing their work. And this allows us to look pretty much the same options as we would get in the review screen where we can make the changes. So we've got the summary and all of the exceptions in a tab, and then you've got all of the results, and you can get results by each exception and by each sample. And this is a really useful tool for us to be able to use. We showed this one in the last session. So given that you can export that information and create that event report, we are then taking the output in that way, and we are producing reports from that we can customize to meet whatever our needs are. This is just a real basic 2A review report that shows different samples, different methods, what analytes were qualified and why. So this is very similar to the kind of information from the event report that you can do from EQuIS. We're also in the process of creating some other things because, again, we have different clients under different programs and they need lots of different things. So a typical 2B or full validation report is going to be a lot more text-based. And you can go, I stole this one off the internet. It's a super fun project. So this just gives you, and this is great. Look at this, no qualification, no deficiencies. This is great. So good deal going there. But it gives you an idea that usually the exceptions are dealt with in text, in paragraphs, and sometimes those can get pretty long and complicated, but it's all dependent on what the client or the program requires. Our attitude here is we'd like to make it as readable as possible. So taking a lot of that information and putting it in tabular form helps. Most reports for any of the programs, for federal or state programs, you want some kind of a summary of what the samples are and how they're related to the laboratory IDs and all that. So you can do all kinds of things with the output from the DQM process. And I'm sure there's other products from Earthsoft that can be useful here, but this is the way we're approaching it for ECS because this is what we get and what we can work with. So that's just another picture of a text piece of a report for a 2B review. And this is just another thing that is real useful for validation reports or review reports is to have some kind of summary table of everything, all in one place that's easy to look at and easy to read. So this would allow you to put in the qualifiers and also what reasons, for what reasons they were qualified down at the bottom. So this is just an example again from the internet.
And Dee, I was going to say, do we want to launch the last poll question about reports at this point?
Oh, well, what a good idea. Very good.
Okay, let's
do that.
The last thing we're going to make you guys click on, I think. So regarding your data review reports, do you read and understand them, don't read them, or read but don't understand them? I like it.
Good question.
I like the mix here. It's illuminating. I would probably be in that last bullet category myself there. Read but don't understand. Almost most of our folks have voted here. I'll give you guys 2 more seconds. All right.
We do hear from a lot of clients that they don't really read the report. So I think those summary tables and things are really important.
Absolutely. Yep. Good. So a lot of overachievers on our webinar here, but definitely still some folks that fall into the category of you don't read them or you read them but you don't understand them. So perfect.
Yeah, interesting. And we do also have there are a lot of clients that very carefully read their reports, and we allow them the option to comment and things, and because again they often have a specific purpose for what they're doing, and they want to make sure that what they're getting from us is going to meet their needs. All right, so what we're talking about is if you produce the tables of the exceptions from the DQM output, and then you can plot them into your text-based report. So that's the process that's going on now, is to develop those and make those usable for us. And we want to be able to customize whatever we create so that it creates a product that our clients can use and can defend and be happy with. And those are just, those are the DQM covers a lot of that on board as is. And then things that we've put in there manually, we can then also pull out as in tabular form and use too. The one thing that you have to keep in mind, though, is that if you don't have, for instance, I know I keep banging on calibrations, but you'll have the exceptions manually because we're looking at the calibration data, but those will not show up in the DQM view. So we're basically just going off of what we've got and then applying the qualifiers. So when you go to create a table, you have to keep in mind that that stuff isn't, it's only the affected results and what happens to those. All right, so what did we gain? As you recall, our main reasons to do this were to be able to save ourselves some time and be able to use that save time to do other things that need our attention more. And so we've got that going on. And then also we were looking to be able to reduce the amount of like transcription error when we go to apply qualifiers, because the old-fashioned way of filtering and sorting and then applying things manually is rife with potentials for error. So using DQM, we get that all in there, we can review it, and then we can automatically upload it back to the database and avoid a lot of that potential. There's still potential for error because we're all human, but it does get rid of a lot of that. And the other thing we need to remember with all that too is that we need to maintain traceability. So you have to know who's doing the validation, who's applying the qualifiers, what rules they were following at the time, and those kind of things. So those are, excuse me, those are part of the process, and we've, have ways of documenting all of that information. And EarthSoft continues to work on things that make that much easier too. So more on that later. What things is not particularly a gain, we still have to add stuff manually. We still have to take the output and turn it into something that we are happy with, something that our clients can use. Again, things change, new things are available, and the process keeps getting better. And then the other piece of it is that we have to monitor the process. Anybody that's watched what can happen in a QAP electronically, if somebody makes a change and doesn't think about it and somebody else uses it for another application, it may not be doing what you anticipated. So you have to have some kind of program in place to kind of, periodically select some data and do a comparison and make sure you're getting what you think you are. But overall, we definitely get the gains. And now I'll turn it back over. Wait, I need to transfer.
All right. So you should be seeing.
Yep.
Good. Okay. So what I've got shared here is some elements for the EQuIS workflow as well as our product roadmap. Let me see if I can get some of this stuff out of my face. Here we go. And so the first piece that we wanted to talk a little bit about was the full software application workflow, because, Dee was talking a lot about DQM and a lot of the checks and those kinds of things that are involved with DQM. And those are certainly part of our check workflow, but there is a lot more to it than just DQM. And there's actually sort of within most of the applications, if not all, we have some various types of checks that are built into the full product workflow. So I wanted to do a quick drive-by of that and then answer some questions related to product roadmap stuff as well. So this is a snapshot of all of the applications within the EQuIS workflow sphere, I guess. And so where you can see the little check marks next to the various applications is where different kind of checks happen within EQuIS. So you'll see, for example, the first place that data is checked when it's coming in is via EDP. There's going to be some sort of verification of the data that's coming in based on valid values, expected data types, things like that. So somebody can't report a non-numeric value in a numeric field, things of that nature. Also things like checking to see if you have identified your parent sample for a duplicate, so that when you get to the point of DQM and you are evaluating your data, you don't have to worry about saying, oh, what was that parent sample in that case? So all that stuff is sort of tied up at the front end, depending on the formats that you use. So then outside of EDP, there are also checks that happen in the field data collection applications, whether that's collect or edge. And those are actually based on EDD formats as well. So the checks are basically the same logic as you would see in EDP or EQuIS Data Processor, but it happens within the field data application. So any of the issues that might show up with some field uncertainties, hopefully are addressed with the types of checks that exist within those field applications. And then within the sample planning sphere of things, I'm sort of talking about this backward a bit, but in the process of setting up a plan in sample planning module, you can identify the particular analytes, analytic methods, various samples and that kind of thing. And so if you have a very complex project that's going to have a lot of different analytical suites for different maybe locations for your site or sample site types or things like that, the completeness reports that are available within SPM will highlight cases where you either got a bonus analyte you didn't want, or you're missing a target analyte that you're expecting to see. And so you're seeing a lot of completeness pieces there as well. You can also tell if a field QC sample that was expected to be collected didn't come in, all that kind of stuff. And so you have a better idea of what your completeness business is, at the front end, basically as samples are coming in. So that being said, of course, the final piece and what we've been here talking about the last 3 webinars is, of course, DQM, which is where we're actually scrutinizing the data after it's gone through all of those other checks to make sure that it's, good enough for EQuIS and what our standards are up to. Finally, we get the opportunity to determine the usability of the data and that kind of thing within DQM. And so that's where that other layer of automated checks exist. So there's lots of different places within EQuIS where you can see those kinds of checks included. And just depending on the type of check and where you are in the process of your data will depend on the type of verification that's happening. So as DTs, we also have this EQuIS product roadmap specifically for DQM that we wanted to share with you today. We have these separated into 3 different buckets, soon, next, and later. So we have planned through basically the end of next year some pretty specific goals and features that are going to be available in DQM. You'll see in the soon bucket, we have some additions to our logic. So you'll see that there will be some automatic preservation checking related to the holding time check. And that particular automated preservation check will also include some new holding time intervals as well. Of course, like Dee said, it will only check it if that data is included in EDD. So when we release that information, we'll also share the specific information that will need to be updated there. We have a new batch completeness check that's also going to be available soon, as well as a functionality to calculate and then compare the calculated RPD to the reported RPD for a couple of different checks as well. So those are going to be coming soon in terms of logic. And then for workflow, we have some additions in the ability to track your status of an SDG through DQM. So if you have a case where you've got multiple chemists who are looking at data in DQM, you can see who's set down a particular SDG or something like that, and who's picked up another. So you'll be able to see the status of the process or of the data in process. Next, we have some additions to logic as well, including reason code additions for a couple of different checks. So for things like matrix spike duplicates, you can now have a different reason code than if you had for a matrix spike, for example. And those will be applied automatically. We'll also add a dilution factor logic for some checks, including surrogate recoveries and the like. You'll see that we will have the addition to allow you to raise your detection limit in cases where there are blank contaminations. And a total versus dissolved RPD check is going to be coming as well. Finally, we'll see some user-defined QC sample association in that event creation step. I mentioned that earlier. That's basically the ability to say, this QC sample is related to these samples over here, that whole process is going to be in that event creation step so that you can do all of that association manually if necessary. If you don't want to go to that level of detail, you can trust the logic that's already in DQM. In terms of user interface, we are continuing to update that user interface for the complete event form, the in-process event, as well as the export event form. So you'll see updates to those sort of throughout our processes. And then also there are some new things in workflow that we're going to be seeing next. And that includes an update to new build QAP. That particular piece is going to allow you to basically say, I'm upgrading from 7.20.4 to 7.21.1, and I don't want to have to rebuild the mousetrap. How do I just add these new checks and parameters? Well, we'll have a QAP that'll let you do that pretty soon. Or I should say next, if we're following the little categories. You'll also see a global DQM parameter saving piece at the event creation. So as Dee mentioned earlier, if somebody goes and messes with your QAP, you might not know that there has been some changes that were made, maybe from one version to another, and we're adding that particular piece to allow for greater transparency of what the specific settings were for the global parameters when an event was created. We're also going to change the way that errors versus warnings are handled. So when you are creating an event, you don't get an alarming list of errors that don't allow you to save them anywhere or anything like that. That's going to be handled slightly differently as well. And then finally later, which is a little bit further down the road, but still planned within the next year or so, we're going to be expanding functionality, which will allow you to rank your qualifiers on a QAP level, as well as do your surrogate association on a QAP level. Right now, both of those are possible, but those are sort of umbrellas that are true for all QAPs within DQM. You'll see some additional logic for our dual column RPD check, so you can tell if your second column is out and if you want to qualify the data for that reason, as well as a new rule for how to handle non-detects in some of our RPD checks. We're going to continue expanding our validation report offerings beyond some of the ones that Dee showed today. There'll be some additions that you'll see coming up soon. Again, user interface updates to the history form, and we're also going to include the new validation reports in the export event screen. And then finally, workflow, you'll see that we are going to make it possible to automatically migrate your non-detect qualifiers in cases where no other qualifiers have been applied by DQM and your laboratory has reported a non-detect qualifier like a U. So your estimated results kind of things can be carried over that way. In the case of the last piece, we are also going to add an event status and some notes that can be associated with individual DQM events in the in-process form. So again, if you've got multiple folks working on a validation effort, you can see, oh, I put that down because I needed to clarify something with a field, or oh, I'm waiting to hear back on something from the lab on this thing. So there'll be a lot more transparency in terms of what you might be waiting for on your validation process, but actually in the application itself. So hopefully that'll help with tracking a lot as well. Okay, that's all.
Okay. And there was one main question actually came up earlier, but I think it goes along well with the roadmap, Liz. So I'll read this question out loud. Are there any recommendations or strategies for carrying over some laboratory qualifiers like U's and J's, but not some of the other informational qualifier flags into the interpreted qualifier field?
So that's a great question. And there are some features that I mentioned in the roadmap that do allow that. Of course, the other thing that you can do is when you are in DQM, I'm going to see if I can switch my screens here and make it make sense. So when you're in DQM, you can filter on particular qualifiers. So for example, what you can see I've done here is I've filtered on my lab qualifiers to see both J's and U's. And so with both J's and U's, I might want to just carry those guys over, but not in the cases where there's already maybe a qualifier assigned by DQM. So I can say, just show me the blanks. And then I could potentially just merge that information over into this particular update apply qualifier field. And if I do that, you'll see that if I clear out this particular filter now, that we can see those J's and U's that have been carried over. Now that is a blanket update. And so if we don't know exactly why those particular qualifiers were added, that might not be advisable from a true validation process. So if you just everything, all your muscles got a little tighter from me doing that. Don't worry. This is the manual side of things. So this is subject to your professional judgment, but it is possible to do that with our current workflow as well.
Cool. Excellent. Well, ladies, I don't see any other questions in here. So I think with the third session, we may have covered everything finally. Excellent. And I know it is after the top of the hour, so thanks for sticking with us for a few extra minutes here. I'll give folks just another quick moment to get in any last minute questions, but I'm not seeing any. So as I mentioned at the top, we'll get a recording out to everybody in case you missed part of this or just wanted to watch it again or anything like that. If you have other questions, feel free, as I think Dee or Polly said, reach out to DDMS or reach out to us at Earthsoft, and we're happy to, we can swap things back and forth too in case it makes sense for one or the other team to answer questions that you have. But we're just so extremely grateful to Dee and Polly and DDMS for putting on this webinar. We're happy to sort of be here and help, but they've definitely done all the hard work, all the heavy lifting, and I think it's been a lot of fun to get to do a bit of this project together. So so thanks to you guys and to DDMS, and thanks to everybody for being here. And shout at us if you have questions after the fact.